Before we begin, please note, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organization. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. We encourage listeners to conduct their own research and consult with relevant professionals before making any business or career decisions. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to Science Warriors, where we explore the strategic forces that drive business transformation towards operational excellence. I'm your host Adel Hameed, and today we're tackling a critical factor shaping success for any company or any leader leading on a project of entering a new market, especially if it's an emerging or developing market. These markets include Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and then away from the GCC, getting into Africa, we've got Kenya, we've got Ghana, Nigeria, and so on. So to achieve optimal success, it's very important to gain an understanding of how the government is aligning themselves with the private sector. And how can you align yourself or your activities strategically towards the government's activities or initiatives. If you align your activities with what the government's trying to achieve, that means you'll have mutual objectives, and this is where you could maximize your value to the local economy when you're entering with your product or service, and we'll get into more details on such examples in the future. But today we're more focused on understanding how the governments in these regions think and how do they position themselves and what does empowering the private sector mean to them. And our guest today is Dr. Jarmo Kotilaine. He's an author of multiple books. He's a development economist. He's been advising governments and private sector companies, and his expertise have spanned between advising governments and companies in Europe and in the GCC, or the Gulf Cooperation Council, which consists of 6 countries. So who is this for? This is for startup founders, business leaders, especially those entering these new markets. We know that success hinges on more than just achieving product market fit. And this is why understanding the complex landscape that these governments and countries go through, especially when it comes to implementing regional economic policies, it's very important to understand them and build empathy with the governments and with the regulators, especially in emerging markets. As you know, that when you're entering, for example, developed markets like London, like New York, these ecosystems have been running for hundreds of years, and they probably have more evolved regulations, more transparent regulations. They already have experimented a lot and refined their approach of how they work with the private sector. This is why you've got, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, which is being a global trading platform or a trading center around the world. So that's why it's important to understand how you can align yourself and how that the dynamics of setting such policies happen. So before we start our discussion with our special guest, Dr. Jarmo, let's grasp the current landscape and consider some expert perspectives. A Harvard Business Review article titled "How Multinationals Can Grow in the Middle East and Africa" highlights that despite economic volatility, the region remains exceptionally fast-growing, but capturing this opportunity requires adapting to shifting consumer behaviors and, crucially, government-led economic reforms. So those government-led economic reforms at times could seem like experiments. So it could work with you or it could work against you. And understanding where do you align yourself, how do you communicate whether something is working for you, whether it's not working for you, whether the government is listening to the private sector or they're implementing these policies in isolation, and whether there is a forum that you could eventually sit on where you could contribute to the development of that ecosystem. These are all factors that we could look at based on this article. It also stresses that the need to go beyond traditional strategies is very important. Investing instead in localized solution, technology adoption, and forging strong government partnerships I'll give you an example, like this is outside the article, but like Microsoft and Google, you can see them partnering up through their education route, through giving free licenses, partnering up with governments in the region. They provide free services to the governments so that they can, number one, help the government achieve their goal, but at the same time, these platform providers like Google training, I think like 10,000, this was a few years back, 10,000 developers, Java developers in Egypt. There are some examples where they provide free access to educational institutions. The same thing with Microsoft. Realistically, Microsoft is supporting the government, but at the same time, they're building their brand identity. They're getting these future users to get used to their platforms. So when they graduate or as they get older and they start working in the private sector, working in companies, their preference will be to work with Microsoft products. So that's how Microsoft and Google, for example, are operating when it comes to entering new markets. This immediately raises a critical question for leaders. The question of how can we, as a startup or an SMB, we're not Microsoft, right? How can we as startups or SMBs effectively build these vital local partnerships and tailor our models for the local requirements? So, and that's always a challenge, especially if you're not multinational enterprise where you have a large amount of cash that you could invest and you could afford losing and investing and losing money in the first 2 or 3 years, like some of these large companies do, without mentioning or getting into the specifics of them. Now, adding another layer as well through another article, which is published by McKinsey & Co. In their analysis, the article is titled, How Gulf Companies Can Overcome the 5 Biggest Challenges to Their Digital Transformation. The article points out that digital is a key enabler. And digital transformation, everyone's talking about digital transformation. The challenge comes in the implementation. How do you implement it? There are cultural barriers. There are readiness criteria within a company, within a country, within a region. What are those barriers? How can you help the government overcome those barriers so that it creates that vibrant private sector that the government is seeking to achieve? What are the practical hurdles to execution, especially when trying to align innovative business models with the overarching policy goals? And how can they overcome those challenges? How can you help the government overcome their challenges? And the last article that I'd like to reference as well is written by Christopher M. Schroeder, talking about the Middle East being overlooked by venture capital opportunities or by venture capital firms. Notes that despite the infrastructure challenges, local entrepreneurs are building scalable, innovative businesses. Global investors, he argues, can no longer afford to ignore this trend. This observation makes us wonder what fosters this entrepreneurial resilience against all the odds, especially when the regulations are not there yet. There is a limited number of investors or qualified investors. When the family businesses, they don't look at the traditional way that the investors look at. They don't look at the startups the same way that the VCs look at. And they come in and they want to gain control rather than encouraging the entrepreneurs or the startups or the companies to grow and flourish, to become global companies, to increase their value. So how do these entrepreneurs navigate all of these challenges, and despite all the odds, they still grow and succeed? There are so many examples of these companies in the region, especially over the past few years. So we've got like Souk.com, which was many years ago acquired by Amazon. We've got a fintech company that was acquired by Amazon Payment Services, which became Amazon Payment Services. You've got Careem, which got acquired by Uber. Yeah? You've got Talabat, which got acquired initially by Rocket Internet. And all of these case studies created that level of confidence that allowed more entrepreneurs and more startups to feel safer that they could start something new and be motivated to start something new. So this is the context. This is what we need to think about when we're talking to Dr. Jarmo. And this brings us to a list of questions. When we're part of active learning, as we prepare ourselves with a list of questions so that when the interview is taking place or when we're reading a book or taking a course, we gain the maximum value out of it, but at the same time we become proactive in the way that we look for answers. This maximizes the level of learning, and I'm hoping that this becomes valuable to all of you, the audience. Coming back to the questions. These questions, I would summarize them in the following. How to partner effectively, execute flawlessly, and foster resilience, and achieve genuine scale in the Gulf's dynamic economy. When I refer to the Gulf, I refer to any emerging or any developing economy. These are new economies. There are many infrastructure investments, many opportunities, which enables companies, tech companies, manufacturing companies to come and capture more value by entering or setting up regional offices or regional factories in these regions. Whether you're an SMB or a startup, that still applies. And that itself, it requires a bit of understanding of the nuanced insights. It requires a bit of a deeper dive into the thinking process behind it. And that's what we need to understand. And that's why we're so happy to have Dr. Jarmo Kotilaine with us today. He's published multiple books. He's a development economist and a strategic advisor. And he's focused recently on the economies of the Gulf. How do they evolve? How did they go from needing to build the necessities? If we're thinking of Maslow's pyramid, for example, how did these governments or the region went from building the necessities into shifting gears to wanting to become a global hub for manufacturing, a global hub of tech, a global hub of fintech. Some of these countries that Dr. Jarmo advised as well recently is Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. And he worked extensively on the financial sector. So building financial sector strategies, private sector empowerment strategies. He possesses a rare blend of policy understanding and practical economic insights. With Dr. Jarmo, we aim to get answers and practical strategies as we discuss, number one, how governments in the Gulf or even like other emerging governments or developing economies, governments of developing economies, are actually managing the complex transition towards private sector-led economies. That's one thing that is in common in most of the economies or emerging economies that we're talking about or we're focused on. The second is the specific tangible challenges businesses encounter when adapting to these new economic models and policies. And then the third item is, or the third question, why leveraging data is rapidly becoming non-negotiable for business survival and competitive growth in the region. We have to highlight that many of these governments, they lack data, they lack access to data. So naturally they can't provide you with the data that's required to build your forecasts or more accurate forecasts like the TAM and the TOM. So what you need to do is to follow other strategies, to take calculated guesses, to work with local consultants to help you understand. And we'll get a bit of better understanding within the discussion as well. And finally is the profound role of technology. And fourth, the profound role technology, innovation, and AI play in reshaping the private sector's future here. So this conversation is designed to equip you, whether you're a startup founder or a business executive or even an investor sitting on a board, with practical insights to navigate these economies or the economic shifts, identify tangible opportunities, and build a stronger, more competitive business. This will help you become a better critical thinker when it comes to evaluating your market entry strategy or the strategy that is right for you when you're entering a specific market. And it will enable you to ask the right questions and build on the knowledge that you have right now and the understandings that you have. Also, to avoid getting sucked into biases that are caused by stereotypes, believing stereotypes. So let's bring him in and start with Dr. Jarmo. Thank you, Dr. Jarmo, for joining us today. as discussed earlier, as I mentioned earlier as well, the audience, they're mainly startup leaders. So it's very important for any startup leader who's coming into or who's leading on a project to enter the region here or going into any region to look at the success factors. And some of these success factors are not just product market fit. There's also understanding what are the initiatives that the governments are following. What are the sustainability strategies that they're looking at? How can I, as a business leader, align my company to fit within those initiatives? So that will definitely help me succeed. So today we'd like to get educated, and I mentioned as well earlier that I'd love to share a bit about your book. So I'll leave that for to you to share with us any insights, any references from the book as well as we're going through these discussions. So as we begin, please give us an introduction about yourself and what got you to become an economist. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a discussion as if we're having coffee together, nothing formal. Yeah. So please go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And the topic that we've chosen around private sector empowerment is one that is very close to my heart and very much critical, I think, for the for the future of the Gulf region, the Gulf economies. What got me to be an economist? I think finance, economics is something that I always, even as a child, found intriguing. I became interested in the stock markets at a very young age, and I think that what attracted me about economics was the ability to influence people's behavior through policy. And of course, the blue eyed me at a younger age doubtless thought that this would be my way of trying to make the world a better place. And of course, the world is a much more challenging place than it might seem to a young teenager, but never mind. So then, of course, I spent many years in the ivory tower at three universities for my education, and became interested in not just economics but also economic history, because in a sense economic theory is helpful, it's interesting, but what I find matters in some cases much more is how we got to where we are, and what are the factors shaping human behavior. That's not necessarily always something that we can reduce to mathematical equations or statistical analyses. And I think that that's been particularly the case in this part of the world. And then after a while, during my ivory tower experience, I decided I want to not just talk about things, I also want to try to do something with this knowledge that I hopefully had acquired. And I became a financial economic consultant. I focused initially very much on the East European countries, the former communist countries, the former Soviet Union, the sort of transition, post-transition challenges of economic development, worked with stock exchanges and financial regulators and banks and ministries of finance, central banks, this sort of thing. And of course, as the sort of emerging market story started to gather momentum, then what was relevant in Eastern Europe suddenly was relevant in many other places as well. And it was, I suppose, this that ultimately in the early years of this millennium brought me to Saudi Arabia, where I worked on a sort of a comprehensive financial sector strategic review and then the financial sector development strategy for the kingdom. I then worked for several years with one of the Saudi banks, and of course, in late 2012, I was asked to come to Bahrain to join the Economic Development Board as their chief economist, which of course, in a sense, offered an opportunity to look at things at a national level. And after a while, I joined one of the government funds in Bahrain, which is in fact tasked with enabling private sector development and economic diversification. And over time, I've sort of worked to diversify my portfolio, doing writing, working with different entities, etc. But I think all under this heading of economic development, one way or another.
Excellent, thank you. And this is also to mention as well to the audience. This is the second book you've got, and it's been more focused on the GCC.
Actually, not the second, but it is the second book on
Ah,
the.
it is the okay. So,
Yes.
how many books have you written?
My God, I think maybe 5.
Okay. So, but this is the second on the GCC, right?
Yes.
In the region here. Okay, amazing. So, this brings us to the topic on for us to understand how we can benefit from the sector or the industry, like in Bahrain, for example.
Hmm.
It's always good to align ourselves, understand what resources there are. The government, of course, is trying to move away from the sector being run or the industry being run by the government to relying more on the private sector.
Hmm.
So, and there are lots of challenges that the government faces with that.
Hmm.
So, we'd like to learn more about the challenges, so that also helps us out to see how we can fit into that. So how does the government see the value of the private sector taking initiative and coming in? Where can we contribute more?
Okay. Well, I think this, as I said earlier, this really is a fundamental question. How do we transition to a more of a private sector led economy? I think the fundamental challenge that we have in the Gulf region really has to do with the history and the evolution of both the government sector and the private sector. And of course, this is something that I talk about quite a bit in my books. So, I mean, I think the reality is the situation that we're in today, of course, was created by the discovery of oil, which then gave rise to what I call the oil government nexus, where oil revenues and government spending, in a sense, dominated everything else, and the private sector was not only in its shadow; it was very much derivative from this government-led activity. I think what we have seen happen in recent years, let's say over the past 10, 20 years, is a transition to a more of a hybrid model where the government led economic order has given way to a, if you like, semi sovereign dominated economic model. So we have a lot of these sovereign funds that are taking an increasingly active role in driving economic development. Of course, many of the state-owned enterprises, previously state-owned enterprises, have been partially privatized, and they are increasingly run like private sector companies. And of course, as these countries now work to re-engineer themselves, then I think we are experiencing a sort of an accelerated growth model that is led by these funds, and they are doing a lot. And I think the challenge is that the real private sector, if you like, the 100% private sector, have effectively become observers, bystanders to a large extent in this process. And I think that what we are looking at in the region today is something that reminds me of this phrase that the Austro-American economist Joseph Schumpeter coined back in 1942, who talked about creative destruction. In the same way as the oil era or the onset of the oil era destroyed the old private sector in the Gulf, I think we need to, in many ways, create a new private sector that is different from what we've had during the oil era. And that is partly about creating completely new activities, partly about making the existing private sector capital and corporate sector work better. So overhauling it in different ways. I think fundamentally, if we want to create a growth model that is genuinely private sector led, we need companies that are growth oriented, that are dynamic, and I think that will require multi-dimensional changes that go all the way from culture to sort of management practices and governance.
Thank you. Just so that also for the audience to understand, when you say sovereign states, it means reliance or the government taking care of many of these expenses and covering,
No, so what I mean is
right?
these sovereign funds, so the likes of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
investment fund in Saudi Arabia. And of course, there are many similar vehicles.
This brings us to another topic as well. So, the power of data,
Mhm.
and how can, I mean, what is the government doing right now to help us out? And like, for example, the simplest thing is when we do a feasibility study,
Hmm.
getting market data and developed ecosystems is very easy. But
Mhm.
getting them in like our regions here or developing economies is a bit more challenging, and it might
Mhm.
vary from one country or one region to the other. So, what I mean, I would like to get your input, especially on our region here.
Okay, so in a sense, if we go back to the challenges, I think data is in many cases a remedy for some of the deeply entrenched challenges that we see among private sector companies. So, for instance, historically, many of these companies were opportunistic. Where can I make money, as opposed to what is an economic problem that I can understand and help solve. So obviously, data is a way of better understanding the landscape, what makes sense, what needs solutions, and how to then potentially calibrate these solutions. The other challenge we have is the quality of companies. So most private sector companies are one man or one woman shows, right? What alternatives exist? Data can help with that. Most of them are B2C companies. So they work in sectors like retail or hospitality or construction. And this limits them to the local economy, severely limits their ability to scale because, of course, you have many of these companies essentially at each other's throats. So, again, data can help people make more informed choices, identify alternatives. There's typically no formal governance at these companies. Uh, and they tend to be extremely labor intensive and low skill intensive, and they tend to be low productivity. So there is a need for people to identify and better understand alternatives. And also through data, they can see how these kinds of approaches really have sort of hit a brick wall. The other issue we have is, or have had, of course, is access to financing. And we still tend to operate with these heavily bank centric financial sectors that tend to give you sort of balance sheet based lending, heavily collateralized lending, which means that many new companies struggle. Data can help them find alternatives. I'm not. That's very often easier said than done because many of these alternatives are still very sort of embryonic at best in this part of the world, but they are beginning to emerge. So data is a tool for them to better understand those alternatives. And of course, it's these financing limitations that have meant that most private sector companies have not grown. So, understanding your financing options, being able to look for them in an informed way is critical. There are issues with accounting, valuation, etc., and I think that helping people build awareness of alternatives is critical. The other issue that I see is a real problem in the region is that many of the policy initiatives that we've had over the years have been kind of magic bullet initiatives. We identify a problem, we hire a consultant, we implement a solution, and then we leave it at that. I think to really achieve sustained change, we need to monitor how things are working and be ready to tweak them on an ongoing basis. And again, that is very much about data. We want to attract capital. We need to show what is working. Where are the ROIs being made? What are the models that can be scaled? And of course, finally, policy formulation needs to be not based on gut feeling, not based on a consultant's presentation. It needs to be fact-based and dynamic enough, of course, in today's very sort of uncertain world. So fundamentally, you want to do better, you want to create better companies, you want to create better policies, you need information.
Yeah, and also going back to the example of conducting feasibility studies, it's it helps investors and companies as well allocate resources, mobilize resources through getting access to accurate market data, certain statistics on imports, certain trends that could present certain opportunities. So I believe that you're right. I mean, one of them is that I think it's all about reducing the risk as well, right?
Yes,
Managing the risk for us. Data
making
is one,
informed
and
choices.
policy is the other one. Yeah,
Yes, making choices not based on gut feeling or hunch, based on information.
yeah, yeah,
If you see your district has 50 companies operating in a particular field, do you really feel like you should create the 51st one?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that brings us to the next question on small businesses, basically
Hmm.
SMEs.
Hmm.
How will all of that support them and serve them? What kind of initiatives are there? Like in Saudi, we see lots of focus on startups and accelerators.
Hmm.
Today, I saw an article between UAE, Saudi, and Qatar. They have like the largest, I don't remember how many, more than 500, I think, startups that are already there. I might be mistaken. I need to check the number.
Hmm.
But yeah, and Bahrain as well. A few years back, started investing heavily in the startup ecosystem as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let me look at the next question. Supporting small businesses. So the
Hmm.
Gulf countries are looking to help small businesses. So startups is one aspect. What about SMBs that are expanding? Let's say they're coming from Europe, they're coming from other regions.
Yeah.
Saudi is inviting them to set up their regional offices in Saudi. Of
Yes.
course, Dubai is doing the same, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain.
Hmm.
So, what should they look at when they come in the region? I mean, what are some of the initiatives that some of these countries within the region are implementing, looking at, or maybe
Okay.
even challenges that they need to be aware of?
All right. Well, let me look at this through two angles. There's the question of
Mhm.
what are the countries doing, and then perhaps the question of what they should be doing.
Yeah,
And of course, in recent years, there's really been a growing focus on FDI attraction, bringing in talent, bringing in businesses from other parts of the world to sort of accelerate this economic paradigm shift these countries are going through. And of course, especially with high potential companies, they are usually ready to roll out the red carpet and offer all kinds of benefits and support packages. Of course, none of that is sufficient in the absence of data, going back to what we discussed just a while ago. I think people need to have a realistic understanding of what these markets are really about, what are the issues that businesses can face, etc. I think this SME narrative has been an important element of policy, economic policy in the Gulf now for about a generation. And I think it's been seen as a key tool of helping drive this private sector development. And I think it's had a significant impact on changing attitudes. I think people are interested in setting up their own companies. But if we want to do better, if we want to create these kinds of stronger, more dynamic companies that I've talked about, it's not enough to say, okay, forget about SMEs, we'll do startups. We need to make private capital in general work better. And I think when it comes to government support, it is high time for this support to be more targeted than it has been. So not just sort of basic handouts for your basic needs, which in some ways have in some cases supported this overcrowding of certain sectors, but targeted support designed to achieve particular outcomes, perhaps particular sectors, particular types of companies. I think there's a real need for conditionality. Companies should show proper plans. They should show some progress in governance. And I think there is also a need to reward companies that are doing things right. I think fundamentally, if we want to get it right in the private sector, we need to, more than anything else, prioritize productivity. And when I look at the Gulf economies today, the three, if you like, obvious wins that I see for this are: number one, we need to become better at pushing capital into higher productivity sectors. So reduce this focus on those traditional activities around retail, hospitality, construction, etc., and look at technology, manufacturing, finance, and so on and so forth. We need scale. Most private sector companies in the Gulf are too small to be productive, and they are not growing. So how can we find scalable models? How can we find support solutions that enable companies to grow, whether it is through organic growth or consolidation? Consolidation is another thing that is still very rare in this part of the world. And fundamentally, as I said earlier, most of these private sector companies are highly labor intensive. Technology is the answer. We need to really push technology down their throats and offer more support for technology. Talked about conditionality. We don't want companies that become dependent on this support. And I think part of making things work better is we need a more diverse private sector. We need venture capital to support startups that can grow. We need private equity to help existing private sector capital work better, etc. There are many things that need to be done. But I think also we need to look at competition law. I mean, we still have many sectors that are dominated by a few big players and others cannot grow. We need to have a level playing field. And fundamentally, I think we need to become better, given the history of this region, at connecting the public and private sectors, and of course the semi-government sector as well. How can we create value chains? How can we privatize assets, companies, do more PPPs, find new kinds of modalities for the private sector to work together with these other segments of the economy?
Amazing, excellent. So you spoke about using technologies and to enhance the productivity, which also is a timely thing. Especially AI is becoming more popular with AI agents, and then the government has the challenge of creating jobs, and they're trying to reduce the reliance on the government to create these jobs, especially for the local talent. And then they're going through the challenge of trying to make the local talent more attractive for the private sector to go on board. So having been as well working with the Economic Development Board for many years and also with the Labor Fund in Bahrain, what kind of initiatives have you seen the region implement? What has worked? What hasn't worked when it comes to dealing with the workforce challenge or creating more jobs for the locals with the private sector instead of the government sector?
What has worked, relatively speaking, is the focus on the supply of labor. I think there's been real progress in terms of economically activating people. And of course, in a sense, the most palpable, probably the most impressive recent example of this is the way in which government interventions in Saudi Arabia have pushed up female Saudi participation in the labor market really quite far and within a relatively short period of time. I think the other area where policy has worked well is in terms of upskilling the local labor force. There's been a lot of money spent on this. Some of it is extremely well, some of it less well. But the net result is that people have been skilled up. There is more talent available. I think there is a far greater awareness on the part of the population about the importance of learning, the importance of training and education. But there are still a lot of legacy challenges as well on all sides. But I think where we have still faced bigger challenges is on the, if you like, the demand side. All the Gulf governments in their various ways have created these programs designed to make local labor seem more attractive, more cost competitive, etc., different subsidies and incentives, etc. And these have had some impact. I mean, I think gradually attitudes are changing, gradually these fundamentals are changing, but it's been a relatively slow process. So I think fundamentally, if we want to realize these aspirations about an economically active and productive labor force, we really need to get it right on this private sector empowerment and private sector development. And in that sense, if we want to create companies that can attract talent, they need to be companies that are worthy of having that talent. So they need to be companies that can show a plan, companies that can deliver a return, companies that can motivate their employees. Very few private sector companies today have proper HR departments. Most of them, I would say today, are cost minimizers. So they don't necessarily believe in the idea of efficiency wages. And when they need to cut costs, usually the easiest way is to cut their wage bill. I think the other issue that people really need to start thinking about is how can they give their employees a real stake in those companies? Now, when the company is a one-man or a one-woman show, this is not going to happen by definition. But there are other models. And obviously, when people have a reason to share in the success of those companies by having equity, by having other incentives, the situation begins to change significantly. We don't want them to be in a situation where they think, okay, the economy has turned down, so my salary is going to be cut, or my job is in jeopardy. And that is less likely to happen if at least key employees become partners. And I think this is something that needs to happen more and more. But there are also other challenges which can be quite significant. So, for instance, very often when people work for SMEs, banks won't lend them money because they are worried about the credit risk of the company in question. Now, we live in a world where most young people will want to have their car, they will want to get married, have their home, perhaps invest some more in their education, in their children, etc. And if they are shut off from bank finance, how is this going to work? So I think that there's also a real need to work on the banking regulations in terms of creating more of a level banking playing field based on more product diversity and somewhat more sort of sophisticated risk management than what we've had.
Yeah, this is an issue. In Dubai, for example, it's becoming less and less of a problem because banks, I believe, my observation is that they're becoming data-driven. Statistics, they manage risks through statistics, through numbers.
Yes.
So they have a higher risk tolerance than other banks in the region.
Yes.
So yeah, so I'm happy to see that this is in Dubai is becoming resolved with time.
Yes. And this is extremely encouraging. And it's also very, very important because at the end of the day, we come back to data. We now
Mm.
have increasingly open banking. We have better data. Once you can measure your risks, you can manage them. You don't need to try to manage risks anymore by eliminating them because this is no longer appropriate or necessary for the age that we live in.
It's not something new. I think this is also something I discovered years ago. Is on credit cards. I remember in the US they used to mail it, and you just do your KYC. They don't even check on you as a
Hmm.
student. You just get a credit card.
Hmm.
And the reason behind it is that they follow a provisioning strategy where they already know that a percentage of that will be a sunk cost, it will be a loss.
Yes.
So I believe, yeah, I believe it's they are already starting to apply these strategies as well, which kind of uh, yeah reduces the risk and manages their expectation as well.
And all I can say to that is high time. And,
Yeah,
and that, of course, by the way, also applies to small micro companies. So, very often, when we look at the advanced economies, this is the first financial product that micro businesses have access to, a credit card. And it may not be cheap, but it gives them access to financing, it gives them some flexibility, it also gives them discipline. Because if you don't pay back your loan, you're in trouble. If you do pay back, your credit line keeps going up and you can graduate to other solutions. And this is
exactly,
what we need if we want to create more dynamic, more growth oriented businesses.
exactly. Thank you. This brings us now to since we're talking about employment, the utilizing technology.
Mhm.
So, how can the private sector become more innovative, especially in the region here? How can they use these automation tools, digital tools, AI? Now, I saw a couple of days back there is a regulation on AI in Bahrain that was introduced with some penalties on abusing AI. So that's a positive move in regulating the
Sure.
AI, within the environment. What else is there?
Okay. So I think the reality is we live in a world that is being rapidly and profoundly reshaped by technological innovation. And technology is literally taking over the world and reshaping the world at an ever accelerating pace. This is the reality that we live in and that we are going to be living in. Now, I already mentioned public enemy number one. For the regional public sector, they have a history of living in this environment where their default input has always been relatively low skilled labor because that has been seen as the most flexible and the cheapest input. Okay, so that has, in a sense, been a informed choice, but also a risk management strategy all in one. Today, this is one of those old bad habits that we need to move on. And go back to what I said earlier. Governments need to play their part. Everybody else needs to play their part in literally pushing technology down people's throats. This is something that we should be funding because it's good for productivity, it's good for sustainability, and in a world where it's shaping everything, it can also start reshaping companies and reshaping attitudes. Attitudes matter, as Peter Drucker said. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, and this is true. We always underestimate this, but we need to be ready to really push the envelope on those. And I think the other thing that we need to do, sort of moving away from generic to the more specific, is not all companies are created equal. We need to popularize success stories. We need to make people aware of what works. And the reality is, most people are not innovators. Most people are emulators. Once we can create these success stories, people will jump on. In the same way that back in the day they jumped on the cupcake bakeries bandwagon. Now there are many, many better ideas that we can help popularize. I think the other thing that is very important is that digital technology, and especially this generative AI that you talked about, this has now become the great equalizer. I think this is probably the first time in human history that we have transformative technology that is available to everybody at basically zero cost. But people don't necessarily know this, or they don't necessarily understand it. But in a sense, in the world of economics, it doesn't get better than that. And of course, what this gives you is a whole universe of information, resources, etc., that SMEs, for instance, 10 years ago could not have dreamt of. Sole traders, whatever. They have access to info and resources that is unprecedented and that is at zero cost. So I think that we need to popularize this and help this, you know, take us to a point where things are more data driven, information driven, more inherently dynamic. People can't just say, okay, I set up a business in this activity, and once I've opened it, then I just run it the same way year after year after year, because things keep changing, partly because of technology, partly because of so many other things that are going. So people need to be responsive, and they need to build agility. You talked about innovation. I think one of the challenges that we've had in the region is that people haven't seen the economic value of innovation, because in these sort of government spending driven economies, and with rapid population growth, they've been making the margins anyway. I think now that is changing, and it is becoming much more important in a world that is as uncertain and unpredictable. And I think that innovation, of course, is not one of these things that we can snap our fingers and have it be the case. But you start creating the demand for innovation by helping companies understand and appreciate the need for it. They can't just keep doing the same thing forever and ever. And I think there's a need to create stronger linkages between businesses and universities. We really ought to be getting to a point where the local universities are surrounded by these technology campuses and bioscience campuses, etc., which is what we have in many other countries today. We need to create more sort of open research centers. Of course, some of the big regional companies have been doing this. I think what we've seen at the likes of Aramco, Sabic is very exciting, but this needs to be scaled up further, and we need to connect the dots as well as we can for synergies. And of course, let's not forget, the Gulf is not a bubble. And we need to also have those linkages open to the rest of the world, attract talent, collaborate with companies, collaborate with institutions, etc. And there are many needs. One of the needs that I see for real innovation and even leadership in this part of the world is climate change. The Gulf has an extreme climate to begin with. Climate change is not making things easier. Let's take the bull by the horns. Let's look at how we can address issues, look at mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and create product solutions that can become marketable worldwide.
Yeah, usually with innovation as well, I think it's many people use it in a very loose form as well,
Yeah.
because innovation is not something that we can just define, and it's an outcome from us needing to survive or to differentiate ourselves, or
Yes.
through R&D, through whatever. So yeah, so this is just to add to your point on climate change is one, because it's unique to this region. Now it's on Earth is not unique to this region, but because we have the resources, and I believe within our growth and our maturity as a region, this is the right time.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And I think you're right that innovation. See, innovation is one of these things. People don't do innovation because they love innovation. They love running around in white lab coats or or sitting and thinking big problems. Of course, there are some people like that. But for most people, innovation is the result of necessity. So why have, for instance, companies in markets like Germany, Japan, the US, whatever, become so agile, so competitive? They didn't have a choice. There was competitive pressure, there was regulatory pressure, there was tax pressure, trade unions, you name it. They always had to think ahead. They always had to be ready to deal with uncertainty and identify new opportunities to protect their results or push up their results. And I go back to what I said earlier. The business culture in this part of the world has benefited historically from too much certainty and too much continuity for people to have proactively embraced innovation. I think this is now changing, and it has to change.
Yeah, yeah, I see that also in Dubai, in the region. So all of these are good signs.
Yes.
Thank you, doctor. This brings us to the last uh, question. It's not a question, just you already kind of answered it.
Mhm.
In the coming 10 to 20 years, what do you expect to happen? What the region, what do they need to do? You spoke about innovation, and you suggested climate change. What else is there?
Okay. Well, let me let me go back to the main topic of our conversation. So,
Yeah,
I really believe that one of the things that has to happen is that the private sector needs to become not just an equal, it needs to become a leading driver of economic growth in this part of the world. And for that, we need a dynamic private sector. That's where we need to get to. Can it be done? There are countries that have done it. I mean, of course, in a sense, the most obvious example in recent history are these East European former Soviet countries that I talked about, which didn't have a choice. When communism collapsed and the state led economic system went away, they had to do it. Of course, Deng Xiaoping's reforms in China started something similar, although the state sector in China, of course, still remains very strong. But we've also had countries such as Sweden that made a deliberate choice to move away from an essentially sort of social democratic state dominated model to create a very dynamic entrepreneurial ecosystem. So it can be done. But I think it requires a couple of things. Number one, it requires persistence and agility. You really need to have policies that are designed for private sector development, but you also need to work on them to see how what is working, what isn't working, how can we tweak them, how can we make them better, how can we sort of set the bar where it needs to go in terms of really creating an environment that is business friendly, not just as a slogan, but something that makes it easy for companies to grow, doesn't burden them with all kinds of bureaucratic complications, etc. So this has to be a real policy priority, which is not just about having better regulations; it's also about their administration, their implementation. And the other thing that is important is that in countries that have done this, this involved an element, a significant element of the state sector just getting out of the way. We can't just say, okay, we have a big, great state sector. They will coexist with this private sector that is still at a very different stage of development. No, you need to proactively redraw the public private demarcation line, and you need to keep doing it in new and different ways. We talked about the sort of value chain integration, privatization, PPPs, all kinds of new modalities. We cannot have your cake and eat it too in this space. So we need to make a deliberate decision to make the private sector the leader, and initially, because of the historical dominance of the government sector, help them get there. And of course, what I talked about, I mentioned earlier, creative destruction. How can we scale successes? How can we dispense with failures through better regulation? But also, we can't have a sort of a corporate welfare state whose goal it is to try to keep everybody alive. That's not how a dynamic economy works. In a dynamic economy, you have entry and exit.
Yeah, usually also it's like there is an unfortunate necessity, even on a smaller scale with companies, if they follow an approach where they keep everyone without having disciplinary KPIs and OKRs or metrics to make sure that people who are delivering good enough, they stay, they can retire, they stay for 20, 30 years. People who are underperforming, if they continue staying there, then it will be unfair to people who are doing what's good enough, or even people who are doing their best and outperforming everyone.
Yes.
So there has to be a cleansing mechanism. And we can look at it even as an example in our human body. We get rid of the dead cells. There is
Yes.
a mechanism that, yes. Thank you, Dr. Yarmo, for your time today. This brings us to the signature question.
Okay.
50 years from now, what do you hope people will uh, talk, or mention about you, or say about you?
I I hope whatever it is, it's something positive, and certainly if it is somehow linked to this concept of creating more dynamic economies, creating a stronger private sector, and ultimately creating productive economies that deliver value not just for shareholders but all the
Mm,
stakeholders, including the citizenry. I think that is what we need. So I suppose I kind of revert to the sort of blue-eyed boy answer that I used to describe my initial
mm,
interest in economics. But I think that fundamentally that is what it's all about, and
mhm.
what we need to be looking at.
Thank you, Doctor. Just as a final note, as well as I mentioned earlier, again on your book, uh, I believe, since I'm already based here as well, this has
Mm.
been the data that you've been sharing about the history, the evolution of the countries in the region. It's actually, it's I would recommend it for any business owner who's entering the region. Or but the question I have is, how do you advise us using this? If people want to learn more, what's the best way for them to remain updated? Is there a channel that they can follow you on, LinkedIn, places that you write? If there is anything that you want to share that builds on the knowledge you shared here.
All right. So I suppose I like to write, and I suppose the challenge with writing books is you don't, unless you are doing pulp fiction, you don't churn them out uh,
Yeah.
every couple of months. At least I don't. I think that sadly, in recent years, my sort of published writing has been a bit sporadic, not terribly regular, but that is something that I am hoping to address going forward. So hopefully that will become better. I can't tell you at this point exactly what form it will take, but
Mm.
of course we all know the platforms that
Yeah.
we have in today's world.
So this makes us feel lucky, because having you with us and sharing your knowledge through us as well, that's already a channel, and we'll make sure that we'll make it. Based on your availability, we'll make it a regular thing, so we become a channel that we can share your knowledge as well with our audience. Thank you so much, Dr. Yarmo, and yeah, thank you everyone for listening and tuning in. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation.
That concludes our discussion today. Thank you so much for tuning in and for taking the time. And we'd like to thank Dr. Jarmo for sharing his insights and joining us today. And I'll share the link of his profile within the episode notes or the show notes that's accompanied with this episode. And we'll share the links to his books as well. Please make sure that you follow him. If you found this conversation valuable, please make sure you subscribe to Science Warriors wherever you get the episode, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify, and leave us a review. It truly helps other leaders as well find the show and understand the context of the show, how it can help them out. And please share the episode with your fellow business leaders in your network who are navigating looking at entering new markets, especially if that new market is based within the GCC market. And as always, remember, behind every successful economic transformation, there are strategic innovators and operational architects. Thank you again for joining us today. Remember, while CEOs may command the spotlight, it's the strategic architects behind the scenes, the true science warriors who engineer valuable, sustainable success through methodical innovation and operational excellence. Until next time, it's Adel with you, reminding you that behind every breakthrough, there is a science warrior, making it possible to push the boundaries, aim for excellence, even through minor incremental improvements. And remember, success isn't just about vision, it's about execution. Until next time, thank you again, and see you in the next episode.